You awaken before the first light, the weight of a fragile economy pressing into your ribs, a once reliable metronome now stumbling, burdened by broken promises. Once you stood as a radiant structure of steel, but now you groan like rotting wood, each step echoing as if debts are being meticulously tallied. At the edges of your realm, clerks wear smiles too wide, stamping documents with a reverent tenderness, while you try to convince yourself that the ink isn't darkening with each passing hour. You label it collaboration, yet it feels more like a grip around your throat, polite fingers slowly tightening, urging you to draw in deeper breaths. Ships appear as silent observers, their hulls battered by the ocean, laden with wares that shimmer like sirens' calls, and you consume without savoring the flavor. You recall when trade felt like an exchange of thoughts, yet it now resembles a murmur concealed behind a curtain, leaving you unsure of who might be listening. Each new agreement acts as a velvet tether, and you cross it willingly, enticed by the warmth of the room before you while your hands remain uncomfortably cold. You maintain ledgers akin to diaries, where every figure stands as a whispered confession you refuse to voice, even as the pages begin to perspire. Companions metamorphose into gentle creditors, inviting you to share their tables, only to slip the bill beneath your plate in silence. You laugh, rehearsed and effortless, while internally tallying the seconds between payments, reminiscent of a cornered creature counting footsteps in the snow. The marketplaces, those reflective hallways, strip you of your substance with each passing glance, compelling you to avert your gaze. You pilfer time as others do, sleep, seizing it from tomorrow, promising you'll return it, all the while knowing you never will. Your currency feels akin to an ill-fitting coat, sleeves constricting, seams straining, buttons yielding softly amidst meetings filled with forced smiles. Somewhere distant, a banker clears his throat, and you flinch, the sound traveling through wires like thunder resonating through bone. The principles you once penned now resemble ancient vows, beautiful yet rendered meaningless, and you trace them with trembling fingers, hoping they still hold power over anyone. Dependencies flourish around you like ivy, lush and flattering, until you become aware of it creeping into the fractures of your foundation. You reassure yourself that it's merely a transient season, a fleeting chill, yet the cold grows familiar, learning your name and returning with increasing confidence. In solitude, you rehearse refusing, yet when the moment arises, your voice evaporates, and your signature appears as if branded. The system that defines you begins to feel like a rented body, organs leased, breath scheduled, and you find yourself unable to unlock your own door. By nightfall, you stand at a window of glass and figures, observing lights dance across the ocean, and you feel the bridge beneath you weakening. Dawn arrives with polished headlines, yet you perceive the underlying message, a subtle scraping resembling a spoon against an empty cup, repeating until it becomes unbearable. You traverse your corridors of ports and regulations, each doorknob radiating warmth, as though someone else had preceded you here. The lenders brand themselves as partners, providing umbrellas amidst light rain, only to later charge you for the shade when storms finally descend. You affix your signature once more, for to refuse would mean standing isolated, and you have come to dread silence more than the terms themselves. Your factories hum like weary choirs, lamenting parts that arrive tardily, and you clap on cue, feigning that the rhythm remains yours to command. On spreadsheets hidden from your sight, your name is circled in crimson, the loop tightening patiently, resembling a noose spun from silk. You begin to ration your confidence, bestowing tentative smiles upon the world, reserving the remainder for the mirror where you practice appearing whole. The ocean roots seem to contract, as though the water itself is pinching tighter, forcing your vessels to brush against unfamiliar silhouettes amidst the fog. A new charge emerges like mold, with no one willing to confess its genesis, yet all assert that you must coexist with it, for this is simply the new reality. You observe currency screens flicker like anxious eyelids, swearing that the numbers blink with increased sluggishness under your gaze, as if stalling the delivery of bad news. At diplomatic gatherings, laughter arrives with an unsettling delay, and you come to terms with the fact that you are adhering to their rhythm, not of your own choosing, but out of necessity. Your debts cycle through seasons, recurring like an interminable winter, and the scent of spring vanishes from your familiar streets. Small nations lean upon you for warmth, yet you too are leaning, a line of bowed shoulders, each one feigning that the burden is bearable. The supply lines pulse like veins, and when one becomes obstructed, a numbness creeps into your fingers, which you instinctively shelter in your pockets, like a concealed shame. The fine print unfurls like a maze, and you navigate it ceaselessly, trailing your palms along the walls, leaving behind beads of sweat where certainty once dwelled. Whispers of alternatives reach your ears, new circles forming without your presence, and the notion possesses a metallic tang, akin to biting into a coin. In your desperate need to remain relevant, you relinquish more of yourself. Rules soften, standards wane, akin to shearing off pieces of your coat to stoke a fire. Your advisors speak in gentle tones, yet their gazes stray toward exits, and you ponder what taught them to await impending collapse with such quietude. At night, visions of a lighthouse that charges you for its illumination haunt your dreams, and upon awakening, you feel thankful for the light, ashamed of such gratitude. Deep within, you perceive a hinge loosening, and the door marked Control creaks a fraction wider, permitting a draft that carries the scent of surrender. Days blur into mere transactions, and you begin to gauge sunlight by the interest accruing, noting how even noon possesses a borrowed essence, provisional and subject to alteration. You sense the scrutiny of clocks, their hands polite yet impatient, tapping against the glass as though reminding you that time was never yours to command. Agreements accumulate like unopened correspondence, and you feel their density before reading, a weight that nudges your posture forward slightly. You convince yourself that flexibility equates to strength, yet each bend breeds a subtle ache, a reminder that something rigid within you is fracturing. The phrase mutual benefit reverberates like a jest once amusing, laughter waning, meaning dissipating until only obligation lingers. You become acutely aware of how frequently you wait, now awaiting approvals, releases, permissions to extend your own limbs without causing offense. Infrastructure once felt like sturdy bone, yet now it resembles rented muscle, contracting at command, trembling when the signal arrives tardily. Your ports remain open through storms that ought to have sealed them off, for closure would signify weakness, and weakness has become intolerable. Each favor arrives meticulously tallied, neatly wrapped in invisible strings that constrict only after you express gratitude. The mathematics begins to invade your dreams, not as numbers, but as a weight compressing your chest, a rhythmic and unavoidable presence. The balance never shifts abruptly. It merely leans, inch by inch, until standing erect feels like an act of rebellion. You come to the realization that no threats are necessary anymore, for anticipation has mastered the art of instilling fear on its own. Choice transforms into a formality, a gesture enacted for tradition, while outcomes align elsewhere, already predetermined. You observe younger systems navigating swiftly, effortlessly, unencumbered, and a complex blend of pride and envy intertwines within you. The safety nets beneath you are the property of others, and you refrain from glancing down, aware of whose hands will ultimately support them. When someone inquires about your desires, the question immobilizes you, akin to a language once fluent now half forgotten. You fill the silence with compromise, fearing that stillness might uncover the scant space that remains within your own being. Gradually, you cease to envision collapse as a cacophony, and instead begin to dread the quiet continuity much more. The system persists in its function, which feels more distressing than a breakdown, for functionality camouflages loss as mere routine. Somewhere deep within, a final lever resists your grasp, and you comprehend that it has already been lubricated for another's hand. You find yourself yearning for urgency, for the panic that at least offered a semblance of agency, while this slow, measured decline envelops you like suffocating calm water. Meetings stretch endlessly, not to reach conclusions, but to cushion outcomes, softening every edge until the remnants of resistance fade into ghostly whispers. You find yourself nodding more often than speaking, each nod accumulating, stacking like unseen bricks in a silent wall being constructed within your chest. The term market confidence wafts around you like incense, intoxicating and sweet, intended to placate yet never meant to truly nourish the soul. You realize how swiftly habits supplant choices, how relief rushes in to fill the void left by surrender far quicker than it ever followed bravery. Your autonomy doesn't simply vanish. It wanes, diluted drop by drop, until the memory of pure control becomes a distant, indistinct flavor. External schedules govern your rhythm, deadlines encroaching before you've even learned to want, and expectations arriving before you can complete a thought. You now comply preemptively, reshaping yourself before any requests are made, for the cost of anticipation seems far less than that of delay. Each reassurance resounds with conditions, like smiles hostage to nameless circumstances that loom silently. You take pride in being commended for your stability, then realize that stability has become synonymous with stillness, and stillness conceals an aching restraint. Your connections appear as borrowed scaffolding, ample enough to stand but insufficient to support any true reconstruction in your own image. You catch yourself defending agreements you once openly questioned, as familiarity masquerades as loyalty, weaving itself into your psyche. Even the act of dissent feels outsourced, softly articulated through intermediaries who frame your objections as gentle suggestions. You perceive the asymmetry now, not as imbalance, but as a posture, the way you always lean forward while they remain unyieldingly distant. The language of obligation takes on a poetic guise, veiling repetition as ritual, and you engage willingly, for rituals seem sacred in their monotony. You cease to inquire about how this narrative concludes, shifting instead to extending the present moment, desperate to avoid provoking consequence. Small liberties are celebrated with fanfare, while greater ones slip away quietly, their absence masked perfectly by the cacophony of celebration. You gauge success solely by the measure of continuity, mistaking persistence for strength and endurance for consent's silent approval. Control transforms into a fond memory rather than an active force, like a childhood home relinquished to strangers who merely rearranged the old furniture. You stand upright, operational, even admired. Yet beneath the surface, your authorship gradually slips from your grasp, unseen and unacknowledged. You recognize how silence has morphed into productivity. The absence of action is lauded as discipline, as if stagnant water could never decay. The world labels you as predictable now, and you accept this carefully, like a compliment that could bruise if held too tightly. Risk withdraws from you quietly, choosing other spaces, leaving behind only polite echoes and vacant chairs that serve as reminders. You inherit protocols instead of choices, volumes thicker than the memories they replace, instructing you how to navigate without elucidating the rationale. The future comes prepackaged, labeled with caution, and you handle it with gloved hands that dull any vestige of feeling that remains. You feel yourself constricting around obligations, like a room overwhelmed with furniture, where no one dares to remove a single piece. Every departure from the norm demands your justification, and justification becomes a language you now articulate more fluently than intention itself. You begin to expect disappointment with such thoroughness that any surprise appears reckless, almost impolite in its audacity. Power now approaches you like a consultant, transient and costly, leaving you with notes that turn into rules you must adhere to strictly. You perform stability so impeccably that you start to convince yourself the performance is indeed the substance itself. The distinctions between partnership and dependency blur, eventually disappearing, until you give up on the attempt to redefine them. You recollect ambition as a fervent flame, a warmth you long for, even though it once seared you. Compliance becomes second nature, automatic as the blink of an eye, and far more challenging to disrupt. Your achievements are quantified by the reassurance you provide to others, rather than by the actions you initiate on your own. You find solace in being observed, for observation has supplanted protection in your world. Freedom seems elusive, like an ancient melody hummed out of tune, familiar yet just beyond your grasp. You barter control for tranquility, time after time, until that calm takes on an unsettling resemblance to emptiness. The system constricts smoothly, akin to a seatbelt fastened too late, a suffocating embrace. You come to understand that collapse does not necessitate failure. It only requires a slow, thin acceptance over time. Deep down, behind the facade you present, a quieter self knocks softly, then falls silent. You begin to conflate survival with success, as both demand the same stasis and meticulous regulation of your breath. The system lauds your resilience, conveniently ignoring how much of it stems from having nowhere else to turn. You master the art of absorbing shocks quietly, transforming impact into compliance before a request even arises. Your influence becomes situational, successful only in spaces already attuned, powerless where decisions take root. Each safeguard has its own sponsor now, and you express gratitude reflexively before remembering it once belonged to you. You become acutely aware of how often you seek permission in subtle ways, framing needs as mere suggestions, urgency dressed as courtesy. Time frames shorten not through edict, but through routine, until thinking long-term feels like an extravagance, almost a folly. You stabilize others by your stillness, misinterpreting this immobility as an act of generosity. The language surrounding you softens, even as outcomes grow harsher, smooth words muffling cold, hard truths. You are assured that options exist, and you accept it as truth, for believing costs less than verifying. Your margins dwindle like breath escaping in frigid air, visible only in exhale, vanishing as soon as hope is breathed in. Dependence no longer proclaims itself. It presents quietly, masked as cooperation, appearing with a smile. You start referring to concessions as adjustments, for that word suggests reversibility, even when it never truly is. The system continues to reward predictability, and you keep supplying it, until unpredictability feels like a violation of norms. You perceive a constricting corridor ahead, yet the walls are cushioned, and no one else appears alarmed. You recall leverage as the weight you once bore in your hands, surprised at how vacant they now feel. Reports on stability sound like lullabies, soothing everyone but you, who hears the verses that are missing. You begin to envy the smaller players who still have the luxury of falling, for a fall would mean choosing the weight of gravity. Control diminishes not amid melodrama, but within the confines of correctly filed paperwork completed on time. By day's end, You find you cannot identify the exact moment you surrendered, only the serene calm that ensued. You awaken to endless reports that extol tranquility and continuity, and an unsettling sense of exclusion washes over you, as though you are the subject of a portrait created in your absence. The decisions that arrive have already cooled, presented with politeness, their warmth stripped away to obscure the fires from which they were molded. Your signature appears less frequently now, yet your name extends further, detached, stamped by mechanisms that have learned the nuances of your handwriting. The corridors of influence stretch out before you, not due to their expansion, but because you traverse them more slowly, measuring every footfall against the approval of unseen eyes. You perceive that urgency has migrated to others, while you tend to the remnants with deliberate, practiced hands. Each compromise is framed as maintenance, a means to keep the machinery silent, even as its trajectory locks into an unyielding course. You hear commendations directed toward responsibility, and come to realize that responsibility has usurped authority without so much as a whisper to announce its coming. A language of inevitability permeates the air, laying out outcomes before you can dare to question their need. You become adept at alignment, contorting yourself to match angles chosen by others, your joints protesting with silent aches. Metrics of stability gleam in green light, prompting you to ponder whose comfort they genuinely gauge. You observe how often others take the liberty to speak on your behalf, their words confident and precise, as if rehearsed, usurping the need for consultation. The cost of dissent rises imperceptibly, not in penalties, but in the sheer effort required to ensure your voice carries weight. You maintain a neutral posture, for tilting in any direction might signify intent, and intent now feels perilous. The system rewards your silence with pathways to access, leading you to mistake access for genuine influence. You discover a talent for self-editing, pruning your words until they arrive aesthetically pleasing, almost benign. Ownership melts away into stewardship, then into caretaking titles that resonate with nobility while constricting the space around you. You convince yourself that this represents maturity, that restraint embodies wisdom, that longing for more is a mark of immaturity. Yet at times, you sense a phantom weight, as if something once held has been relinquished without your consent. The trade system continues its seamless pace, revered for its fluidity, and you are applauded for the minimal disturbance you bring to its flow. In the brief moments between acknowledgments, it becomes clear that the collapse has already unfolded, for nothing seeks your input anymore. You occupy the center of this motion, yet nothing turns because of you. Stillness envelops you like a tailored garment. Reports label this state equilibrium, yet you experience it as suspension, a breath held indefinitely, never reaching the point of release. You remember a time when negotiation felt like steering rather than balancing, when the direction held more weight than mere composure. Now you are lauded for your ability to keep the vessel steady, even while the current quietly decides your destination. Debt does not call out, it murmurs patience, instructing you to wait until waiting has become your sole capability. Obligations intertwine like shadows at dusk, indistinguishable, impossible to evade without consequence. You recognize that leverage has not vanished. It was relinquished in increments far too minuscule to mourn individually. Every remaining safeguard is contingent, and you meet these conditions instinctively, before ever pausing to ponder who established them. The system hums with indicators of health, and you identify the sound as sedation rather than vitality. You remain welcome everywhere, consulted frequently, yet nothing falters if you choose to leave the room. The power you once wielded now lingers only as a memory, referenced with reverence, never to be replicated. You perceive that the future has lowered its expectations of you, and in turn, you have conformed to meet them. You come to realize that control does not evaporate in a single instant. It erodes slowly, across the span of calendars, renewals, and courteous reestablishments. You feel a sense of lightness in its absence, a lightness that instills a greater fear than the weight you once carried. What endures is the management of repercussions, meticulous, skilled, and perpetually praised. You search for a crisis to shatter this stillness, yet stillness has fortified itself as the most formidable shield against disruption. The system of exchange continues onward, efficient and tranquil, bearing your essence without your approval. You now grasp that collapse can be pristine, systematic, and nearly unnoticeable to all who observe. You are not vanquished, you are assimilated, neatly enveloped within a process that no longer requires your intent. And in that ultimate serenity, you embrace the reality. Nothing shattered dramatically, yet all that granted you autonomy gradually slipped away.